I'm going to be moderating today's session on the power of data. The aim is to provide an overview of what the process is about, what the idea is, how to strengthen our work with the different countries in order to further empower the 2030 agenda that is being implemented in every country on this global process. The power of data is being coordinated by the Global Partnership, the organization in charge of the coordination of the project. However, there are other organizations that are engaging. The World Bank is one of them. UNDP is yet one more. UNICEF, of course. We're going to see a presentation from UNICEF, UN Fund. The UN Statistics Commission were one of the components, the regional offices and the division at ECLAC, and of course, the CSOs, that is the group of statistics heads at the funds and programs and from the UN together with the Global Partnership, the body coordinating this entire effort. In our region in Latin America and the Caribbean, the idea or what we want to push forward is we want to incorporate not only the actions from the governments to promote the 2030 agenda, but also our stakeholders, the private sector, civil society, non-governmental organizations. That is, how can they engage and become involved in the process in order to carry out or actually deliver the information, the data, in order to further meet the goals and the indicators contained in the Sustainable Development Goals in our countries, but also across the globe. To date, many have joined this effort in Latin America and the Caribbean. 5 countries have joined: the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Colombia have joined. And we're hoping that next year some more countries will join. And our role at ECLAC on this regional effort is to help to build capacities in order to follow up on the 2030 agendas content. But ECLAC is the body in charge of annually conducting the forums of the different countries in order to follow up on the 2030 agenda on the SDGs. This is a forum that is performed every single year, and we have presentations designed to follow up on the 2030 agenda, the specific goals that are being pursued every year. So this is the focus every year. Next year, it will be on goals number 3, 5, and 8, and 14. And every year, we address goal number 17. We have, at this session, we have 4 presentations by 4 colleagues that have been involved in this effort throughout. We have presentations from UNICEF, from the Global Partnership, also a country that is going to make a presentation, but also civil society is going to make a presentation. Without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to each of our panelists. Our first presentation will be by Liliana Carvajal. She works at the Data Analysis and Planning Division for monitoring of UNICEF's goals. This is a focal point for topics that have to do with births, children, and adolescents, health in Latin America and the Caribbean. She's an epidemiologist and also a biologist, and she has wide experience of more than 15 years this kind of activities. She's involved in the process of the power of data. And without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Liliana so that she will be able to make her presentation. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Rolando, for that introduction. Thank you, colleagues, for your time, for joining the discussion today. As Rolando mentioned, I work for UNICEF. Now I'm at the regional Latin America and Caribbean office. I wear two hats at the time. I'm the head of the section of planning and programs and the data manager. So I hold two positions and I provide support. My theory is to provide support to the countries in terms of the entire data generation cycle in terms of use and decision-making purposes. So it's a pleasure for me and for UNICEF to be able to support this process as co-leaders of the power of data. Thank you so much. Next, please. Why are we going to talk about data and why the power of data? Many of us have joined and we are convinced that data are important, but let us discuss this together for a few minutes. Amina Mohammed, the Vice General Secretary of the UN, the co-coordinator of the board of the Global Partnership, reminds us that only through data that are accurate, timely, and inclusive, we will be able to exhaustively assess the challenges that we face, identifying and investing in the most appropriate solutions whilst measuring the specific results and progress made in order to better build after COVID-19. This is the vision that has pushed this effort. A lot of what we've done is based on this vision because of the impact of COVID-19 and the need to rebuild efforts in the different countries and beyond. Next. And as we all know, we're halfway to 2030, less than 6 years, because we're about to go into 2025. And at this time, only 17% of the goals, of the SDG goals, have been met. And so we'll still have a long way to go, but it's been less than ideal what we've managed to do. We know that we need to double our efforts in order to create transitions in food, energy, and connectivity, digital connectivity efforts in order to ensure access to quality educations for children and adolescents. And we need to provide employment and social protection while we address the triple planetary crisis. For those of you who know, it refers to climate change, pollution, and the loss of biodiversity that is having a big impact in every country, on every society, regardless of the level of income. We see this more frequently on the media and in our own everyday lives. The UN system, the World Bank, and the global partners are supporting domestic leaders in order to move forward. As we all know, and we're going to deal with this more, data are the fuel that promotes progress along all of these transitions. Next, please. And Global Partnership have developed a very interesting analysis, an analysis on return on investment that was posted in launched in 2023. The outcomes have created a big impact. They tell us and they educate us, and they tell us that one single dollar in investment creates an economic impact worth $32. What does this mean? What it is assumed here is that data have an actual value in order to open up new economic opportunities and impact, as well as to cost savings. So this analysis that was published by the UN and Global Partnership has been a very significant cornerstone. Next, please. As we've identified throughout the so many years working with data and the fact that global partnership through the power of data has put this at the core, we are going to need more sound data systems in order to create a revolution in decision making. We need science-based data. We need to transform. We need to open up economic opportunities, and this will all lead us to make greater progress to the meeting the SDGs. Next, please. However, the current business as usual, the institutions, the countries, the governments are used to this business as usual, is restricting the potential of data, particularly the lack of political prioritization, the fragmentation of projects and programs, chronic underinvestment, and the approach too many small size projects and not enough large scale ideas. So we're undergoing a process. We've had enough of very small scale projects that do not reach out to the populations that are more in need. So we need to provide sustainability into the future. And based on data, this is an essential component of this process. Next. Okay, all of these challenges, as we saw in the previous slide, are more of a political nature. How are we doing things? What kind of decisions can we make? What kind of priorities can we set? Of course, we need to address these by getting political international support, but also in order to bring about change, we need to call on global partners and create a shared approach. The power of data is setting the table and calling all of the stakeholders, both at the national, global, and international levels, in order to have one single priority on the agenda. Data, the use and support of the generation and use of data, and strengthening these ecosystems is also important. Next. But what is the power of data? This was the introduction. Let me go into detail. The Power of Data was an initiative that was launched by the UN and the member states of the SDGs Summit in September 2023. That is more than 1 year, as one of the 12 initiatives to ensure the progress of the SDGs. Again, we deal with this analysis on investment. Data are the fuel that promotes progress. Investment pay dividends in average $32 per each dollar invested. So it's a great investment. Countries have been unable to capitalize on this dividend because of lack of prioritization, inappropriate isolated investment, and capacity shortages because we don't have enough data for decision-making purposes. So the purpose is to move forward towards the meeting of SDGs by strengthening national data and statistics systems. The big promoter is based on creating innovative partnerships in order to align the actions of the partners and in order to provide the potential to increase assistance. We will come back to this innovative partnerships. Next, please. So the approach of this or this focus of this significant initiative or platform, the main objective is to contribute to strengthen data systems that are necessary to meet the SDGs in every country. How do you ensure this? Different size, because every country has different challenges or are different moments in terms of their capacity or ability to use and create data. So these are leadership, working with the national leaders that assume a strong political commitment and call on the main stakeholders around a national vision. We're talking about leadership, government representation, the planning offices, the ministries, the statistical offices, the high-level leadership, that is the national voices, effective alliances that will promote collaboration and coordination while reducing fragmentation and bringing in line the support with national priorities and making the most of existing mechanisms. We're working together. We have a single voice, and we need to support the single needs of every country. Consistent action. We need to make the most of existing programs, mechanisms, and investments. And also a very significant item in the agenda is the mobilization of resources, learning, assistance. We need to make the most of financial resources. We need to provide technical support at government, private companies, civil society, donors, the UN and other stakeholders need to provide their support. Together, So as you can see, it's been set out and built in a very inclusive manner, considering the most important part, that is these 4 items: leadership, partnerships, consistent action, mobilization of resources, learning, and assistance. Next, please. Okay, who are the co-leaders of the power of data? So we have the co-leadership is led by international agencies, UNDP, UNICEF, UNFPA, this CCS, UN, the World Bank, and the Global Partnership for Sustainable Data. We have the logos to the right, and we work together at the regional level, at the global level, at the country level. We're all at the table. The co-leaders provide significant experiences from capacity building, conducting surveys, for example. Surveys, some of us support the countries in technical terms. Also, the census says technical assistance to make the most of new data and new technologies to support the SDG goals. Each co-leader has relations with the governmental partners in terms of supporting the data systems, and we have the expertise that is required for these platforms in order to further strengthen common interests. Co-leaders work together in order to make the most of our experience, and we have multi-stakeholder networks designed to support national priorities whilst using new investments in data. We're about to finish so that Freddie will tell us about progress. In order to support all of this, the entire initiative, we need to have the support of both civil society and NGOs. We can reach all those objectives without the co-leaders. We need the engagement of civil society in order to set these national data partnerships into motion. We need information demand to come from civil society. It is the citizens that should understand and support us along this process. Sometimes it's lack of data, lack of evidence. Civil society organizations have wide-ranging programs in many other countries on data, national data partnerships. We also have civil society organizations and NGOs. They're leading the initiative in order to understand the importance of data in order to meet the SDGs. And civil society is leading the initiative. We're talking about governments, co-leaders, and international agencies, civil society, and NGOs working together. And my very last slide, what we hope to achieve through this initiative for working together is 4 specific pillars that can be summarized here. Promoting the progress of SDGs through sound, effective systems by informed decision making, through greater profitability of the investment in the public and private sectors, reduction of fragmentation, trying to find a collective approach, and greater accountability with transparency and the ability to monitor the progress towards the SDGs. I'll stop here. And my colleague Freddie will talk about the progress so far. Thank you. Thank you, Liliana, for your excellent presentation and for providing the whole scheme on how this works, who are involved, how can we take action in order to move forward, in order to close the gap when it comes to data and the 2030 agenda, and how can we collaborate all together in order to meet all those objectives. I'll give the floor to Freddy Rodriguez. Everyone, he's so famous. Freddy is the regional manager, the regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean for the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development. He leads all of these technical partnerships and all of the negotiations within the countries in order to lead that coordination and the commitment of the various political stakeholders in order for us to be able to close these data gaps, something so necessary to meet the 2030 agenda goals. He's based in Bogota, and he is a staunch promoter of all of these initiatives across our region in Latin America and the Caribbean. Freddy, you have the floor. Thank you, Rolando and Liliana. It's a pleasure to see you here on the screen and see all the people that are joining, particularly the civil society organizations that we want to take this message to today. Very briefly, about what we've achieved so far. Liliana said it very aptly. The launch of this initiative was in September of last year at the New York Summit. We had many different countries attending. So under that framework of the initial 15 countries that joined in the beginning, you can see some of the pictures of some of the meetings that we've held in Latin America or even in Africa. When we launched the initiative, they've helped us to identify those bottlenecks and the actions necessary to move forward with the SDGs and to better understand what the initiative has to contribute. Some calls have been made. Civil society has been invited. Of course, there are many more civil society stakeholders that we need to reach out to. And this is part of the action that we need to undertake to bring on board all of these civil society organizations that want to work on data, but they're still not part of the initiative beyond the intentions that they've expressed. Five different countries joined in 2023. In many cases, they've been more wide-ranging stakeholders from many different sectors, as I said before. There are a number of exercises that are being conducted at both the national and global levels in order for us to do advocacy on the initiative by prioritizing new investments, such as, for example, the one from the World Bank, providing greater funding to some of the countries and also contributing some spaces for consulting in cases such as the Dominican Republic. And in a minute, we will hear the Dominican Republic's NSO manager telling us what the progress has been in that country. And also the political support has been important. We've focused a lot on the influence, the impact that we can have from the different sectors on national governments. We need to make them understand that data are not an expense, but an investment. As Liliana mentioned, for each dollar invested, you get $32 return. So we need to ensure that investments that are usually lower and are increasingly becoming lower on data national statistics to be strengthened so that projects and programs set up by countries and national governments, but even the private sector and civil society need to be properly based on evidence. Any projects that are being implemented without a clear context and express need from the communities, particularly marginalized communities, if you don't have a clear context, the result will be projects that will not have the appropriate impact. We've also disseminated the initiative at the UN, at the World Bank meetings, ECLAC, ECA in the case of Africa. We've also had some discussions with decision makers around the initiative, but what have we managed to do in the countries? In Botswana, for example, during the launch, the initiative, we succeeded in mobilizing resources from the government to support the creation and the statistical capacity while strengthening the availability, accessibility, and use of data. In Ghana, for example, data exchange has been made a priority. We've been dealing with multi-stakeholders in civil society in order to focus on three specific sectors: health, education, and the environment, where you can see these opportunities for data exchange. In many cases, you find hurdles that prevent us from, in terms of legal hurdles and governance hurdles. In Somalia, they have undertaken to collect 100% of SDG indicator data for level 1 for 20 by 2025. Which means that they have a focus on action when dealing with poverty. But coming back to the region, some examples from the different countries. We have Colombia. It held the World Data Forum a few weeks ago, but we have some subnational efforts that are starting to prove more successful because they're reflecting the needs of the communities, particularly with an ethnic approach, and also information disaggregation efforts are being made. Colombia has become an example for other countries in the region on inclusive data processes and the differential approach. Dominican Republic are going to be explaining this, but they are promoting a new act. In Uruguay, statistics on violence and crime, these rates have increased in the past few years. So, and we have Costa Rica, which have started to deal with these indicators for SDGs that lack measurement criteria, and they have begun to work on 5 of them. They're trying to include the Ministry of Planning and others, government stakeholders, in order for them to focus specific actions and resources. Costa Rica is one of the countries that has made more progress in terms of the SDGs, but they want to implement a number of actions that will help this process move forward faster. And they have a weakness when it comes to access and use of data. In many cases, this has an impact on the indicators. But what comes next? In the short term, in 2025, we will have Ecuador, Brazil, Guatemala, Antigua, and Barbuda, which have expressed their will and their intention to become part of the initiative. So they will be trying to identify specific demands that will focus on the SDG indicators or in a sustainable development team that will make it possible to close the information gaps in those countries, but also help with the implementation of the 2030 agenda. So what we're trying to do with today's call is also to bring in civil society organizations that are working in those countries that I just mentioned, plus any new countries that are going to be joining Ecuador, Brazil, Guatemala, Antigua, and Barbuda, for them to be able to express their interest in becoming part of the initiative by joining. Here you can see a QR code. I encourage you to scan it from your screens with your devices so that you may express your will to join. It's a 1 hour call. Many questions, of course, will arise, and we're going to try to address some of those questions during today's call, but hopefully you will be able to join the initiative. We call this the power of data. It needs to provide national level impact, and it should include a significant component of civil society participating actively in both the consultations as well as in decision-making exercises. I will give the floor back to Rolando. Thank you, Rolando. Here's the QR code. Thank you, Freddy, for your explanation on how we're faring, who's engaging, who's involved, and what are the actions that are being taken in each of the countries. And we would like to ask Miosotis Rivas. Miosotis Rivas, if if for those of you who don't know her, she's the general director of the Dominican Republic's NSO, but also in her position as director of Dominican Republic NSO, she's the chair of the Commission for the ECLAC, the Statistical Conference for the Americas, that is the governing body of the Latin Americas and the Caribbean statistics offices. She has a degree in political economy, human development, wide experience working with Central American and Caribbean countries, Plus, she's done the regional coordination of these activities, and she's involved in meeting the goals of the 2030 agenda. Sotis, I will give the floor now for you to make your presentation. Thank you, Rolando. I'm delighted to be here. I'd like to thank the Global Partnership for the opportunity to share some reflections with you all around the initiative of the power of data. And I'd like to refer to some guiding questions that we were provided with for purposes of the panel. And the first one is why the Dominican Republic's government decided to join an initiative such as this. Liliana, in her presentation, clearly stated or talked about a region, and we're talking about Latin America, and we're talking about inequality. I believe that this is of the one of the main reasons that the Dominican Republic joined this effort in order to highlight the inequalities that we find in a country when even when this is a country that is acknowledged as a growing country for the past 50 years, but this economic growth has not been translated into an improvement of the living conditions of a high percentage of the population because there's still many inequalities. And also, we have the fact that the Dominican Republic is considered to be an average income country. So bringing in capital, bringing in investment into the country is important, and we need to continue to take actions designed to meet the goals set for the sustainable development goals set out on the 2030 agenda. And it's becoming harder, but this also has to do with the fiscal conditions in the country that do not make it possible to improve the distribution of the income, hence the inequalities. LAC conducted a number of surveys last year. They supported us as a country when conducting an exercise to find about inequalities in the Dominican Republic, and we see high concentration of income in the high income population that restricts the capacities and the abilities of part of the population, and this has an impact on the realities of both men and women everyday lives. We have the informal economy. We have adolescent pregnancies. We're on the top or at the top when it comes to adolescent pregnancies, but we're also an island state. We had a poet, Pedro, that said that the same track the sun walks and how this is having an impact on climate change, and that inequality somehow worsen the realities and the impacts of any phenomenon, of any atmospheric phenomenon in our country. So clearly, the initiative of the power of data is trying to raise the political level about the importance and the relevance of data. So we decided that joining this initiative, particularly in the short term, we have defined that this was our intention to make an amendment to the legal framework in the Dominican Republic. We have an Census and Statistics Act in place that goes back to 1959. And when you look and see that the 2030 agenda is a rights-based agenda, don't leave anyone behind. If you look back and see that our act was enacted in 1959 during a very dark period in the Dominican Republic when it comes to rights. During the Trujillo dictatorship, we know that this was an act that was conceived when statistics were tied rather to control issues. It's not an agenda or an act that deals with rights or democracy. Hence the importance for the Dominican Republic to find a way to move forward in enacting this legislation, because this has been at the Congress for more than 20 years. But Liliana mentioned the partnerships. The NSO has entered into a number of partnerships, and at some point, we worked with a former senator, Karina Raful. She's now the she's the Minister of Police. But we had to gather all of the progress made in Latin America, such as the Official Statistics Generic Act that was enacted during the America's Statistic Conference that Rolando mentioned. Our regional best practices code has also been created by LAC. So the new challenge when it comes to statistics production has to do with the operation of national statistics offices, because many people see statistics as something focusing on just censuses and surveys. And so standardizing and regulating all that production is important if we want to improve the quality. So far, we've been developing and working with some of the partners that Liliana mentioned that are part of the global initiative. Here at the Dominican Republic, we had our first meeting in February, our first formal meeting. The team includes people from the Global Partnership, UNICEF, UNDP, the resident body coordinator, which is part of the system. We also have the World Bank involved. And once in a while, we've been talking with the UN country team at the Dominican Republic and also with ECLAC because they're providing support from Chile. I believe that one of the main challenges that we're facing is actually one has to do with the management of resources. Dominican Republic is a average mid-level income country, so it's hard to work in two different directions. One has to do, or rather three directions. One has to do with the bill that we have enhanced in order to have to assure the principles of official statistics and best practices across the legislative divide. Is not only about having an NSO that is managed by the ministry, but we have the need to have an entire constitutional mandate. And then we have the narrative. I'm going to deal with civil society. Then we've been working on two different aspects of the narrative by identifying key stakeholders that can become part of the processes. We need to hold discussions with them. And then another one that has to do with the creation of consensus within civil society, academia. We've been working with the support of a consulting firm, BNUD. They're working with us in the Dominican Republic, and we've held a number of discussions in different spaces with civil society expert researchers that will somehow enable us to provide our opinions and hear opinions on the bill, how to include civil society and how to. This is where we need to create spaces. We need to create a sense of urgency with the amendment of the bill. And that sense of urgency will not come unless we have high demand. Data is not only aimed at creating public policy. Statistics have a very important role to play when it comes to the exercise of citizenship, what the governments do, where public investment is going. And from my standpoint at the Dominican Republic, civil society is not fully empowered. That is, the struggle requires data, and we at the NSO have been concerned with generating data and information, but we need this whole robust system that will ensure the confidence and the trust of civil society, because we need to produce quality data that will not have any impact from political parties or international bodies or agencies, data that will make it easier to exercise citizenship, make it easier for civil society. About the important plans for next year, we need to continue to work on the act, the bill, particularly we need to hold a number of webinars and send out some communications and put the narrative in front of the public opinion. I'll stop there, Rolando. Thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you, Miosotis, for telling us about the experience of Dominican Republic around this, the part of data effort that was created in 2023, but 5 Latin American countries have joined, and now the Dominican Republic has been pushing hard in order to have the enactment of a brand new legislation for statistics that will include all of the modern day components that a Statistics Act requires. I will give the floor to Gloria Guerrero. She's the Executive Director of the Partnership for Open Data in Latin America. She shares partnerships with governments, international organizations, with development agencies and communities in order to promote the use of open data and the value and digital technologies as common goods. Gloria, thank you for joining us. I now give you the floor so that you can make your presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rolando. I'd like to thank the Global Partnership for inviting me. It's a pleasure to share the space with the Dominican Republic and UNICEF. For us, as ILDA, as a civil society organization that works at the regional level, it's very important to engage, to participate in these efforts, but also to acknowledge what these kinds of initiatives involve by thinking about what is it that we expect, what kind of opportunities we have identified from the initiative of the power of data in Latin America. It's a potential changing the way in which we address data, but ensuring that data will be more inclusive and more actionable. In Latin America, we hope that the initiative will help to build a culture where data will not only be under the power of governments and organizations, that they will be co-created significantly by the communities. I believe that it is also important to open up the conversation and rethink how data can help us to meet the goals of the 2030 agenda, but particularly involve more civil society organizations, grassroots movements, collectives that are looking for new ways to creating impact and improving the living conditions. And we see that data are a tool that can prove very useful along this process. So we have new possibilities and invites us to be civil society participants. I'd also like to put on the table how this initiative can and becoming better public policy. But what are we lacking? What statistics are not complete? Maybe public health, education, environmental sustainability. I believe that these are big challenges for a region. And to this end, thinking about how the voices of groups that are directly affected or that are marginalized in different contexts can be raised through data and their contribution to these processes. At ILDA, we're working with different local organizations that are addressing hyper-local challenges, identifying the kind of data that they need for their agendas, also by thinking about access to facilities and public services and preparedness for climate emergencies. So all of these things that are taking place in hyperlocal organizations can also improve the conversation by thinking about the power of data in a more open, more extensive manner. Without a doubt, and I believe that Miosotis mentioned this, data are not only numbers or an Excel spreadsheet. They're also a way of telling stories and advocating change. And we believe that the value proposition of this activity for civil society organizations is just that they can provide us with greater context, better connection, better linkages beyond the numbers. And we need to deal with the stories behind the evidence. I'd also like to take this opportunity to encourage more civil society organizations to join this initiative, and let us use this project, the Power of Data project, to promote these conversations in our countries and our communities, and also be able to humanize and localize the data that we need in order to improve SDGs and the living conditions in our region. And I'd also like to seize the opportunity because I know that we're running out of time, but let me contribute three very appropriate, relevant points for the conversation. And we'd like to make the most of this initiative and think about the future and what comes next, because we know that more countries are going to be joining, and it has to do with developing participatory governance data spaces. Hence, the role of the NSOs is so important. Capacity building. How can we improve the creation of these new technologies, and also to have civil society co-manage these initiatives once we tell them that they can co-create using data, and also find new ways of using the information in order to reach out to the communities in a closer manner, in order to understand the most urgent needs, the most pressing needs of the community. So data, statistics, and narrative through the initiative can provide us with brand new opportunities to promote greater citizens' participation, particularly effective participation. So thank you very much, and I will just stay here if you need me. Thank you, Gloria. I will keep the three last takeaways: data, statistics, and narrative are essential components to this effort. Let me take note, because it describes the process very aptly. So we have a couple of minutes for a Q&A session. Questions from both participants and panelists. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand or let me know in order to open up the microphone. We have a comment from Christian. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello from Southern Chile. I'm doing field work, but we have the Americas in addition to Honduras, Mexico, and Mozambique. Anybody has any questions or comments on how to join this process, the Power of Data initiative? Rolando, you have Christian. He raised his hand. Christian, go ahead, please. Okay. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank you for letting me join you. I'm very grateful for having listened to the presentations and also learn about the profile and how you're doing this data collection effort. There was an entire discussion that, of course, could prove very long, but understanding that having data available doesn't actually involve making good decisions, because oftentimes data are not taken into account. Experience has shown this often, but there's also discontent within civil society because of this situation. Why data, despite that they're there, why are the right decisions not being made? I'm part of the Global Network for Sustainable Futures, and it turns out that part of the conversation that we usually have within it. I work with academia and universities. They're usually producing data, but there are lots of issues when we deal with data. They're not public, not a whole baseline of public data. Their update is not actually dynamic. Lots of the data that we get, unfortunately, the traditional approach is that data should be taken from traditional sources, that is hard science, instead of the knowledge of original peoples and communities that also have lots of information available. And this information just remains in the air and nobody validates it. I believe that a significant effort needs to be made there, particularly the territories, because I work with risk and I was in Rio Grande do Sul during the climate event. We knew what was going to happen long before the tragedy hit. And despite the fact that the authority had all of the data available, they failed to take the right decision. So some work needs to be done, whether it's a strategy, the way in which we're communicating or visible as data, the way in which we're sharing and gathering data. I believe that we need to do some work there in order for this to actually become empowered and being reflected in public management effort, and for communities and civil society understand that this is an entire process. I'm from Chile. In 2010, when we had the big earthquake, the fifth uh, biggest earthquake on Earth, the problem was that we didn't have any data available. This is why the wrong decisions were made. So this is an important issue. We can no longer use the excuse that there are no data available. We need to promote, we need to assess and evaluate and hold these kinds of conversations. But on an everyday basis, we need to improve this, because I believe that at the macro level, there's a significant diagnosis at the macro level, but at the micro level, where decisions are being made, there's something that needs more work. They're not listening to the information. They're not listening to what the data has to say. And if they do listen, they don't understand it. And when human beings fail to understand something, they just can't deal with the information. So I need that there's some work that needs to be done on that aspect. And at the Sustainable Global Future, this is our stance, and we are planning on supporting that same line. Thank you, Christian. I believe you're right. And the power of data is about that, how to link the information from the different bodies, or from academia, civil society, organizations, governments, UN bodies, agencies, and so on and so forth. This is a very significant topic. We have one more question, and then I will give the floor to our colleagues. What about the countries that are not represented yet? How can they join the initiative? How can new countries join the initiative? Thank you. So I will leave those two questions on the chat. Same order. Liliana, if you have any comments? Thank you, Rolando, and thank you for the question. This meeting is designed to do that. I believe that Freddie can provide with more information, but the starting point is showing interest. Freddie, you have the floor. Thank you. Any countries that want to join, this is an exercise. Clearly, countries need to express some sort of commitment, political commitment. Christian mentioned that there are data available from different sectors. Part of what we want to do at the initiative is how to integrate civil society data. So we should stop just dealing with the traditional approach information harvesting, but also information from non-traditional sources, such as citizen-generated data. Civil society has a significant role to play. So this will also enable to produce better, high-quality data. Countries should express their political commitment through their NSOs, or the resident coordinators. They can file an application to become part of the initiative. Our civil society can also join, regardless of the fact that the countries have joined. So the invitation, Christian, is join the initiative, make part of the process. There are many things to provide, lots of room for improvement. The initiative, it's in its inception phase, so we want to establish the connections within the power of data process. Thank you, Freddy. Sotis, would you like to comment? Yes, just one final comment about what Christian said. I would say there's lots of data out there. Of course, it has to do with quality on the one hand. What are the benchmark data that you can somehow use? Because sometimes you end up having a competition. Because everyone wants to say their part, but we need to have a benchmark, a standard. I believe that it in place. And as far as what Gloria was saying, I want to, here at the Dominican Republic, we have a sort of a slogan. We say we're putting a face on data. Civil society should help to further the narrative that we need to put in place. There are a number of things that we need to show, because data may look cold, but how do we deal with this? Because now with the use of technologies, information and communication, for example, in the case of the America Statistics Conference, maybe dealing with Colombia, UN Women or LAC, we've conducted a podcast called Descifrando. We want people to reach out and come closer to data. I'm an economist, and sometimes I'm in the midst of a group of lawyers, and people will say, no, leave that to an economist. If it's a number, then that's something for economists and statisticians and mathematicians. So how can we make sure that people will no longer be afraid of data? And based on my experience in Dominican Republic, you need to take this to settings dealing with sports, because sometimes you know a lot about sports. Sometimes you need to build a bridge, Freddie and Liliana. We need to do some work, maybe with the global partnership and the partners and the initiative. This is how can we translate all this? Let me stop here. Thank you. Thank you, Miosotis Gloria. There's a question, there's an additional question on the chat. What are the requirements that we need to meet in order to join the project as a civil society organizations? Okay, based on what Christian was saying, thank you for the question and for the comments. I fully agree with what Miosotis just said. These initiatives let us think about data in a different way and talking about democratizing data, maybe pulling them out of the technical agenda, these complex agendas. Only those of us who know about data, or only statisticians, know what they say. And I believe that because of this, the partnership with civil society is so important. Not only organizations, but journalists that can help us to build narratives and histories based on these data, because they should become tools, not an end, not the data for the sake of data, but what for and for whom. I believe that we need to answer that or address that question, and the transformation power of data is huge, and we will only be able to make the most of it if we succeed in working in a coordinated multi-stakeholder fashion by combining our knowledges. I believe that the future of the agendas, if we think about artificial intelligence that is based on data and quality data will only prove successful and have positive impact in our region if we manage to deal with it in a coordinated, collaborative manner. Government, civil society, journalists, academia, the private sector. I believe that there's a huge need to think about ourselves as a group, but not only about technical aspects, but also processes, and they're a tool. They're a tool for something else, in this specific case, for meeting the goals of the 2030 agenda. And the last question, I believe, Freddie, it deals with the requirements in order for more organizations to join. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And we want to thank you all who have joined this webinar. I'd like to thank Jorge Castilla for his support with the translation as an interpreter for this call, and tell you all that we're very happy to have been able to share with you all of these stories. Thank you, everyone. Yosotis, Freddy, Liliana, Gloria. Those that supported us with your knowledge, your wisdom, and your presentations in order to further promote this part of that initiative in our Latin America and the Caribbean region. As you can see, this is a region that has been a staunch promoter of this process, and we wish to include many more countries in the initiative that the UN system, together with the global partnership, is working on. Thank you, everyone. Have a good time. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year for everyone. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.